Hi, welcome everyone here today. My name is Ben DiScipio. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Texture Capital. And if you've responded to one of the ads for today's webinar, you know that we're here to talk about NextGen Scientific. They're going to be doing a series of fundraising, starting out with a 506c Reg D for $10 million, which is what we're here to listen to about today. And I have with me Jason West, who is the EVP of NextGen's, and we'll talk about the investment, what the opportunities are there, what's important for you. We can talk about the structure of the business. We'll get into a little bit of the use of funds as well, and then we'll kind of open things up at the end for um, uh, a live Q&A session. So as you kind of come through the webinar, feel free to enter questions into the portal, and we'll answer those questions when we get to the live Q&A section at the end. And if any of those questions aren't answered live, we will prepare some answers that we'll send out at the end of the webinar. So we're here today. The global oncology market exceeded $220 billion in 2024. And right now it's projected to grow um, double digits through 2030. Additionally, NextGen Scientific's positioning itself to participate in this expansion with two clinical stage cancer treatments currently in development, both of them targeting solid tumors and precancerous skin conditions that affect millions of patients worldwide. So this is really, in addition to the impact of the money that you could make in this investment, this is true impact. This is saving people's lives, saving them a tremendous amount of medical bills, etc. Additionally, we're talking about an overall addressable market when you combine all of the businesses that are involved within Ionix, which is the company that is being set up for NextGen to invest into. And Ionix has four companies. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the total addressable market there is $3.3 trillion by the 2030s. This represents a huge opportunity for investors and the company alike. I want to thank everyone for coming here today. We're going to be taping this webinar so that you can watch it in the future. So if you have to leave midway through, or if you were not able to attend today, you'll be able to download the video of this webinar. And as I said, let's submit those questions as the webinar is going along. I talked a little bit about the agenda and the timing. But in terms of compliance, this webinar is for informational purposes only, does not constitute an offer to sell securities. All statements made are subject to the private placement memorandum, which is dated January 26, 2026. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Jason West. Jason is the Executive Vice President of NextGen Pharmaceuticals. And Jason, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I have a background in biology and law degree from Vermont and a master's degree from Northwestern University, MBA, and been involved with the business since the inception. Have helped, with the overall strategy and approach that we've taken thus far to our clinical trials, as well as our nutraceuticals division, and just been there from essentially the very beginning, and really excited about where we're going based on where we've been, and definitely excited to share it with everyone today.
And if you're not familiar with the pharmaceutical or the supplements industry, you may encounter some words today that are unfamiliar to you. We'll try to catch those when we can, but if we don't, feel free to ask it in the questions as well. Jason, I know that one of my more enjoyable conversations with you was early on when you shared with us your the founder story of really all of this, which kind of came down from your dad. Tell us a little bit
Mhm.
about that story and the and how it centers around that plant.
Yeah, you bet. Let me just go ahead and I can just dive into the screen or the share screen here with our PowerPoint, and we can walk through some of this information. Hopefully, everybody can see that now.
Yep.
All right. So this plant that you see on the screen in front of you is called Arum palestinum. It's a that's the Latin binomial for the plant, and it actually grows wild in the Middle East, predominantly in a lot of the territories that everybody's hearing about right now on the news, for better or worse, largely in the West Bank, and it's actually considered just a naturally occurring botanical over in that part of the world. And for the last 1100 years, actually, it's been used as I'm going to call it essentially an old home remedy. It's it's customary in that part of the world. If you start to feel sick, then your mom might make you a tea out of this plant. They'll pick it. It has a bulbous root, and they would chop it up and brew it as a tea with lemon, olive oil, garlic, things that are available over there in that part of the world, and then you just drink it. It's very similar, probably, to chicken noodle soup in our parlance. And they've been doing this. We did a literature search early on, uh, all the way back to the ninth century AD. And this plant is actually recognized and referenced in the literature, even all the way that far back. So what we found was efficacy across a lot of different maladies, if you will. And it caught our attention because you would think that if it is, in fact, if there's nothing to it, if there's no efficacy, then why would it be around for 1100 years in continual and consistent use? So, from a scientific standpoint, it kind of piqued our curiosity a little bit. And my father, who's the founder and CEO of the business, is a PhD medicinal chemist and synthesis chemist. And so we have a laboratory. And he just got curious and was back in that part of the world back in, I think it was 2005, and ran across the plant again, kind of from his youth, kind of got reintroduced or reacquainted with the plant, brought some of it back here to the United States and started testing it. Lo and behold, there are, in fact, molecules just naturally occurring in the plant. This is just, as we say, this is just what the good Lord gave us in this plant. And it does, in fact, fight cancer. We started out with petri dishes and then graduated to more complex animals, mice, rats, etc., and just conducted our research and took it as far now as right now we're actually in clinical trials with two um, drugs, which are essentially based on what we found in this plant.
And you know that we're talking about having two drugs in clinical trials. This is not a startup right here. This is a mature company, both on the pharmaceutical side as well as the supplement side. I mean, you've already raised, correct me if I'm wrong, is it $75 million
That's
uh,
correct.
for Ionics? That's
Mhm.
quite a bit of money up until this point. What kind of spurred on the need for a new kind of round of financing?
So as we've gotten, further and further into the clinical trials, we know that there's additional clinical trials that we would like to pursue, and now is the time for us to bring in additional investors. As everyone knows, it's an exceedingly expensive proposition to develop drugs, and the interesting thing that we've seen with this plant and with the drugs that have been developed out of it is that we're seeing efficacy across a broad spectrum of different cancers, which is a little strange, and rather unexpected, frankly, from a scientific standpoint. But the long and the short of it is we have multiple different kinds of cancers that we would like to pursue trials in, and that's going to require additional capital, and that's where we're headed.
Great. And we're starting with this 10 million for the Reg D. This is a real opportunity. We talked about that addressable market. Um, and certainly the real, diamond here are these two drugs that are in clinical stages. And for those investors that may not fully understand what having a drug in clinical stage means, talk about what that means in terms of potential down the road as those trials progress.
Yeah, it's extraordinarily rare, I would say, to have two drugs in clinical trials. A company like ours, very small. We're not Merck, we're not Pfizer, GSK, and so forth. And so it is rather unique to get drugs this far in the developmental pathway. And the fact that we have two, a company of our size, is rather unique indeed. The vast majority of compounds do not make it this far. Of course, there's always risk, ahead, but we feel like we've managed that risk downward as best as we can. And the efficacy and the safety signals that we've seen in our clinical trials thus far, the drugs are performing well, and we're just excited to take it further and further. So
What
yeah,
what
it's
what
been a
can
lot.
an investor kind of anticipate in terms of, hey, what could the return be if one of these, let's say one of the two, succeeds in their clinical trials? And I know that
Yeah,
success has multiple pieces to it, but so
it
just go
does.
into that a little bit.
It does. So let me back up a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit about the drugs themselves. We have one of our drugs is an oral capsule that is taken specifically for various different cancers, and that's in clinical trials right now at Virginia Commonwealth University, which is conducting an investigator-initiated trial on advanced prostate cancer. And the other drug actually is a dermatology drug. And so we're focusing there on precancerous skin conditions referred to as actinic keratosis. And that's a little, as you kind of warned everybody already, Ben, that's a little bit jargon heavy in this industry. Actinic keratosis is the kind of the red spots that you might see on the forehead, especially where it's subjected to a lot of sunlight and sun damage over the years. And there are, I believe, 60 million cases of that each year. And so the addressable market just in the dermatology space is just absolutely huge. And we have some clinical trials that are about to start in Sweden and the Netherlands to focus our attention on that. And so the dermatology drug would be the example of maybe the even more conservative situation. And an exit with that drug, which could involve another drug company coming and buying that drug from us, anywhere from 300 to 500 million, just for that one drug. And then if you layer on top of it any success with the oral oncology drug, then you're looking at more on top of that, of course. And those numbers are tend to be larger in the oral oncology space.
Right. So these are things that could make a huge difference to the overall wealth of the investors in this round, as well as just any investors that are currently invested in either Ginsata Pharmaceuticals or Ionics.
Correct.
Um, so now, as we talk about these two drugs, let's not forget that we also have that wellness side. And we had talked about that $3 trillion market, and people often think of the supplement business as being a little bit of a kind of stepsister, right? Of
Yes,
what you're doing right now. But we're talking about a market that has $759 billion addressable market by 2034. You're talking about even that supplement industry by itself that's a respectable number.
it is. It is. And that's a, yeah, I apologize. I left that part of the story out just to focus on the drugs. It's interesting. in large part, I would say that our nutraceuticals or or our dietary supplement or nutritional supplement, those are all interchangeable terms to me. The nutraceuticals division is actually kind of interesting. We set out to focus our attention on drugs. And the nutraceuticals wasn't necessarily part of our mindset at first. As we started doing our research and brewing this tea, we're in a very small rural part of central Kansas, small town America, Main Street. And, a lot of the rumors are true. Everybody knows your business in a small town. And so we started making this tea as part of our research, and then the word kind of spread around town, and so pretty soon people started approaching us and saying, "Hey, I would love to get a hold of some of your tea," and that snowballed. And sooner or later, we realized that there was a desire on the part of the market and the public to use a product. At the time, we didn't really know what to call it, but we quickly learned that it was essentially a dietary supplement, nutritional supplement. And people have a desire to use that in conjunction with some of their other cancer treatment. And so we just gave it to people, and that snowballed and gave rise to this entire organization. Now we call Hyatt Life Sciences, which is our nutraceuticals division.
That was probably the first revenue coming in, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And it's been growing quite significantly the last several years. And a lot of this is really just dependent upon um, brand recognition and people understanding that you're there or knowing that you're there. And so as that word has continued to spread, that's where we've started to see a lot of good revenue increases. And there's just tremendous upside in that industry alone, as you said.
Absolutely. I mean, with addressable markets that large, even small, modest increases in market share bring in quite a bit of money, right?
Indeed, for
Let's
sure.
go back to the drugs for a moment because we're going to hit that wellness side again a little bit later. But let's talk about the drugs. Now, the first one, the oral capsule, the 6.02 um, oncology focused drug. What are the next milestones in that development?
So the next milestones for us are to continue with the prostate trial and continue hoping to see, good outcomes, good results for patients. We've focused on prostate in this particular trial, but we've also seen other signals in our safety. They call it a dose escalation phase of our phase one trial, which is essentially seeking out what is the optimal dose. And in that trial, we saw efficacy against a host of different cancers. One is called uveal melanoma. It's actually a cancer that affects the eyeball, and it's an underserved cancer. And this is just an example of how the development pathway could look based on what we've seen so far. We saw great efficacy against that uveal melanoma, and that's an underserved cancer, which means that we could get a fast track designation from FDA that allows us then to get into an approval process, more streamlined approval process from FDA. And once you get an approval in one drug, now you've got your, I don't want to say golden ticket, but it is a
Right.
huge deal to get an approval, even in an underserved cancer like that. It's relatively rare, so that the size of that market isn't necessarily what drives value. It's the fact that you have an approval in a drug in a cancer indication, and then from there, typically you see companies like ours starting to branch out even further and further. It's a just a credibility issue at that point, and that's where that credibility comes from. Is that
Once you're approved as a as an underserved cancer, does that make it easier to then broaden it to
oh
other uses? Yes.
100%, 100%. It paves the way for other cancers, and now you're on the radar screen of everyone in the oncology industry.
That's great. That's great. Now, what about the second one, the 21T, the
Mhm.
dermatological cream? talk about what are the next milestones for that? That one could potentially be close to regulatory approval, no?
It's even though it started much later than the 6.02 compound, 21T, because it's a dermatology drug, it's actually much faster to evaluate success and to see, signals of safety, signals of efficacy, because essentially you can just watch the skin lesions disappear. And so that one, you're right, I think is potentially a faster exit for us. And it's very difficult to really tell. I hate to put a number on it, but I think that we would be seeing an exit as early as 2028 with that drug, because dermatology companies tend to identify acquisition targets much earlier in the process than an oral compound would.
So that's just 2 years from now.
Correct.
That's pretty aggressive. Now, that being said, we've talked now about what finances could look like for drugs that exit trial stage into approval. Um, and we've, talked about potential exit timing now for 21T. Just for those that are watching, just another disclaimer that any discussion of exit is not a guarantee that an exit could or would occur in this particular case. We're trying to talk about the factors that could be involved as we do it, as we move along, but there are no guarantees in any of this. So, what we do know is that these two drugs are currently in uh, trial stage. Is there a definition of the stage that they're in that you could share with us?
Yep, it's referred to as phase 1B, I believe is the technical term. And the cancer industry and cancer regulations within the FDA are kind of its own little subset. And so phase 1B is actually somewhat of a hybrid between phase 1 and phase 2. You often start to see companies in phase 2 focusing their attention on specific cancer indications, such as in our case, prostate cancer. And that's so it's somewhat that, I guess I would call it, that hybrid between the two. And that's interesting to me because from an exit standpoint, again, from a developmental pathway standpoint, companies begin to look at you in that phase 2 kind of time frame. And so that gives us some, I think it causes us to maybe to be a little bullish in terms of where we're at, because we're starting already to see efficacy and proving ourselves in a specific cancer indication. And then we've got so much other data to point us at other different kinds of cancers as well. And so each additional cancer indication that you can start to show efficacy against just continues to raise it's an inflection point for valuation, I guess is the best way to phrase that. And
Sure.
so
And where these two drugs in particular are so valuable, talk a little bit about what your IP strategy behind this is.
yeah, it's that's key in every drug development company such as ours is patenting, and so we had a pretty significant amount of patent experience in our previous lives in a different industry entirely, still very much chemistry related, and interestingly enough, there's quite a few overlaps between that industry, which was actually oil and gas chemicals of all things, and pharmaceuticals, but there's a lot of similarities and overlap there. And so we got pretty darn good at patenting, and we employ what's called a briar patch theory of patents, which is you patent the one idea, and then you create a kind of a briar patch around it with multiple other additional patents, which allow you to keep your competition at very far away from you. That way, and it happens very frequently actually in the pharmaceuticals industry. You create a molecule, and then your competitor creates a molecule which is just different enough that they can go and get a different patent as well. A great example of that might be Keytruda and Opdivo, two of the largest cancer drugs in the history of mankind. And so this happens all the time. And we, seeing that, said, okay, let's use the briar patch theory to keep people very far away from our inventions.
So we know that the real jewel here is on the pharmaceutical side in terms of return value for the company, for the investor. But there's real value to be had in the Hyatt side of the business, which is the revenue generating wellness product. And before we get into this, let's just talk a little bit about structure. So we've kind of
Mhm.
thrown around a couple of names of companies. Um, but let's kind of lay out the structure for the investors here so that they understand what they're investing in, what the companies are, et cetera. So
Mhm.
over here on the side, we have a company called NextGen Pharmaceuticals LLC, which is the the manager of NextGen Scientific. Right now, they're the sole owner of NextGen Scientific. NextGen Scientific is the company that is being established for the investing into ionics. And it's NextGen is set up to hold an initial investment in ionics, but continually invest in ionics through NextGen. That is
Mhm.
the way that it's set up. And ionics as a holding is a group of four different companies. And Jason, why don't you kind of describe those? I know Ionics fully owns three of them. One of them they mostly own. Talk a little bit about
Mhm.
each one of those.
You betcha. So, what you see on the screen here, and hopefully that's coming through to everyone, Ionics Life Sciences is actually, we did a lot of tax planning when we were setting up the business. Again, from some of our previous knowledge in terms of, how to do a lot of tax planning, and that's why we set up the businesses this way. So, Ionics is actually domiciled in Dublin, Ireland, and Dublin is a kind of a well-known low tax jurisdiction. And so all of our, if we were to make profit at the organizational level, then it's taxed at a 12.5% tax rate, which is much lower than our corporate taxes here in the United States. And the reason for that is so that we can preserve as much capital as possible, drive additional R&D, and then hopefully the end result for everyone is a larger payday at the end. Genzada Pharmaceuticals is our drug development company where we have 6.02 and 21T, the two cancer compounds. And then Hyatt Life Sciences is our nutritional supplements business. Um, Interestingly enough, and again, a lot of tax planning went into this, a lot of just work around how to best situate the companies. And so Onc Life Sciences, which is down there at the bottom of the page, is our intellectual property holding company. And there's value from a tax standpoint in terms of holding the IP actually separately in its own little kind of ecosystem, but it's all part of the same overall entities that we're working with. And then because several of us actually work at both Genzada and Hyatt, and we have a variety of different times during the day that we're switching off and on various different hats. Um, so we have GHS, which is actually our employment company. So our payroll, it's a payroll entity, is basically what it is. And so the Genzada Pharmaceuticals, which is the blue box out to the left-hand side, is the manager of NextGen Scientific. So a lot of names and probably some complexity there, but it's all here geared towards securities laws and tax laws.
And just so people don't get confused, there are indeed two different Genzada companies, right? Within this, which is
There are.
gets a little confusing at first. So
Yeah.
Genzada Pharmaceuticals LLC is the one that is the manager of NextGen,
Yes.
and they're also the previous primary holder of all of Ionics. but the company that is under Ionix that holds the pharmaceutical division is Jinzada Pharmaceuticals USA, which is
Yes,
a different entity than Jinzada Pharmaceuticals LLC. Uh,
correct.
and Jinzada is the pharmaceutical side. Generally, Hyatt is the wellness product side, and Ankh is the IP holder for all of them,
Yes,
and they all roll up into Ionix.
yes,
So
correct.
that being said, we've talked about how that, this is really a sneaky good division within the next gen kind of um, covered businesses. Uh, Talk about kind of where Hyatt sits right now and what the opportunities for growth are there.
Yeah, it's we I my view, we've barely scratched the surface when it comes to the nutraceuticals. The market is just so large, and it is highly diversified. It's a very fractured industry overall, but it really lacks a lot of rigor. And so our view is that we can really differentiate ourselves quite significantly as a company that's focused on science, focused on efficacy, focused on results. And so our goal is to actually run some clinical trials, even with the nutraceuticals company, which is a little challenging because of the rules in the United States. But I believe it's possible. And the overall result then can be that we separate ourselves from the rest of the pack when it comes to veracity of the data, when it comes to the efficacy and so forth. We saw just such huge amounts of interest coming out of COVID. And that's COVID actually is what I think drove the global industry numbers so much higher than even some of the long termers in the space had anticipated. And so we think we can be there, right along with the biggest and the best of them in this industry.
And for anyone who knows the supplement industry, you know that it is an advertising driven
Yes,
industry. And talk about that piece because the amazing thing that I heard is that Hyatt's sales up until this point have largely been just through word of mouth.
it has. It
So
has.
just
We
think about the potential growth there from adding advertising to that piece.
Exactly right. I think if I had a marketing budget that we could deploy, which is part of the use of proceeds and the thought process behind the fundraising, is to really accelerate our growth quite significantly. And you're right, it's been largely word of mouth thus far. And the interesting thing is people talking has been actually much more effective than we could probably ever be, because people will tell you the unvarnished truth, just person to person. Of course, if you hear it or see it an ad on TV or something like this, then there's immediate skepticism. But I think the results actually are what speak for themselves, and that's why people are starting to catch on quite dramatically.
So um, let's talk a little bit about use of funds. So you're going to be raising $10 million in this Reg D. What are those funds going to? And is 10 million the extent of what you're looking to do in this fundraising round?
No, actually, we are. This is just the beginning, and so we're running a Regulation D, the 506C fundraising right now, and then immediately on the heels of this offering, we'll be opening it up to a broader audience, more public audience through the Regulation A fundraising. And so, all told, the goal is, and what we've anticipated is to raise a total of 10 million through the Reg D and then another 75 million actually through the Reg A fundraising. So that's coming next. And the overall idea in terms of, initially the 10 million and then the 75 is it's really all about R&D and putting that money to use in terms of developing the science further and further. That's how you can really increase the value of the overall organization is through the R&D and a little bit
Right.
of marketing.
So you're talking about most of that $10 million coming in through the Reg D going straight to those trials, right?
Correct. That's exactly right.
with maybe a little bit going into marketing?
Yeah, probably a little bit going into marketing, and then the rest of it is going to be devoted to, like you said, the clinical trials.
Because that's where we see the potential for the biggest growth.
That's right. Exactly.
Um, Near-term milestones aside, we talked a little bit about the milestones affecting 21T and 602. What about other milestones? Are there milestones with the Hyatt products that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Let me skip to the Hyatt slide here just real quickly. You can kind of start to see a little bit. We didn't include all of the information here on the various different products, but we started with the what's called a Fia Plus. It's the encapsulated version of the what began as the T, and there's good stories all around about that. But at the end of the day, an encapsulated product is a much more desirable product from a nutraceutical standpoint. And so we shifted our focus to the encapsulation work and powdered ingredients. And then as time went on, we really started to notice, significant opportunity in the glucose control world and in inflammation in particular. That's the Arum Flex that you see on the screen here, and then Arum Focus, which is the blue label. And so just those alone, the mental clarity product is one in particular. As the baby boomer population ages, inflammation, glucose control, and mental clarity, those three in particular are going to be and are already a huge part of the focus for us. And we have additional products in mind as well. So I think a lot of your growth comes from having a fully built out product line, but also at the end of the day, efficacy. That's the main goal. And if people see the efficacy and experience that for themselves, then the marketing budget doesn't need to be very large at all.
Right, which is great. Um, so I know that we have a Q&A session that's coming up soon. One thing I wanted to point out is that we don't yet have any questions to answer. So if you have any that come to mind, certainly enter them. We'd be happy to kind of answer those live when we get towards the end. Let's um, let's rewind a little bit. Um, let's go into let's talk about this. What we have so far. So we've raised $75 million. Talk a little bit about where that started, Jason, and your various kind of stages of raising and where it became apparent that you had something here that really was potentially taking off.
Yeah, you betcha. So I think I mentioned earlier that we had a business in a different industry, and we were fortunate enough to have enjoyed great success in that industry. We at the time, around 2013, when we actually had an opportunity to sell the business, we were the number three player in that industry, and we were battling international giants all the way. And so it was a large exit. It's public information, so I'll tell you it was a $300 million exit. And so we took the proceeds of that. We paid Uncle Sam, paid off the shareholders, and then we took the proceeds that were left and we went and drove it into this cancer research. And that's essentially, that was my family and I. And so at the time, we didn't know what we really had. It was very early and very exploratory, and we just started testing and doing as much work as we could. We'd send it off to various different universities all over the country and ask them to test it in various different environments. And the results just continued to come back over and over and over again, and very encouraging. Now, early stage, you're testing your compound, and this is a little bit the way that drug development goes in general. And so we followed a rather similar path. You start in a petri dish, and so you put some cancer cells into a petri dish, and then you put your compound in, and hopefully you see a kill rate of some kind. And we did. But what you normally don't see is a kill rate against every single cancer cell that we tried. And that's not a very technical term, but that's a real head scratcher.
Mm.
Because it doesn't make sense that you would be effective against all these different kinds of cancer cell lines because they're biologically diverse. That's just not how the biology of cancer cells work. And so our, our efforts continued, and eventually we graduated into larger and larger, more complicated testing, and that's when you introduce more of the what they call small animal testing, the rodent and then non-rodent testing. And again, the results just continued, and so we gained confidence at each step and eventually decided, okay, now we're comfortable taking on outside investment, and that's when we began doing so. In I think it was 2015 is actually when we started bringing others in for the ride with us, I guess.
Now, to kind of add on to the fact that this is not a fledgling company. This is a company that is has already established itself. You had an independent valuation done. You want to talk about that?
You bet. It's exceedingly difficult to put a value on an at the time and now even I guess I would still call us early stage pharma or early stage biotech, because in part you don't know what you don't know. And so the challenge is in identifying, what those inflection points are from a valuation standpoint. But there's a firm back in Boston that really specializes in this. They actually do a lot of work with J&J and their oncology division, and so we felt comfortable that they know what they're talking about, and they can take us where we need to go from a valuation perspective. So we asked them to dig into our files, take a look at everything, and what they came back with was, in my opinion, pretty darn encouraging. I think the overall total valuation for the business came in at 312 million, and
And that was
that's the total.
and that was what year that was done?
Gosh, it was 15 months ago, I think.
Okay, 15 months ago. So as of 15 months ago, respected valuation at $312 million, and that's Ionics, correct?
That's correct.
So Ionics and its group of companies. Now we do
Mhm.
have a question that just came in. I believe we've answered this one, but to be clear, they asked, have any funds been raised before now? And yes, we have raised 75 million. Was that in several tranches, Jason, or was that all in a single tranche?
No, it was in several, and we usually try to just raise what we need to get us down the road as far as we can see. And then, depending upon what we need to do, then we adjust and then figure out directionally what we need to do from an R&D standpoint.
Right. So let's get into a few more questions. I've got some. So, what's the estimated market size for actinic keratosis treatments? Do you know that?
Boy, it is it's very, very large, and there's varying estimates. What I do know is that between 55 and 60 million cases a year of actinic keratosis alone. And so the dermatologists are treating that number. And so it's an extraordinarily widespread thing. Now, not all actinic keratosis will eventually turn into cancer if left untreated, but you still have a large percentage of that, in my opinion, an unacceptably large percentage of actinic keratosis will eventually become skin cancer. at some point if you leave it untreated. And so the interesting thing about actinic keratosis, or they call it AKs, is that the current treatments are not great. They use the liquid nitrogen to burn it off. And so anybody that's been through that can tell you that it's not the most pleasant thing in the world. And it leaves people, in pretty tough shape they don't really feel comfortable going outside, for quite a while after the treatments. There's another treatment, which is a cream, and it is probably even worse. Some of the pictures are pretty graphic. I would call it essentially an acid peel on your skin, and our product doesn't do that. And the efficacy we believe is going to be even higher than both of those treatments. And so the reason that's important is because if the current treatments and the current standard of care, and I'm sorry, I'm giving you probably a little bit more detail and nuance on this answer to this question than you probably want, but I
I
think it's
love it.
important. Um, the reason it's important is because if the standard of care, the current, practices in the industry are, either really tough on patients or have a lot of side effects, then that represents really a point of entry, and a competition opportunity for us as a compound that is really relatively benign. I mean, you put it on your skin and it does its work, and you don't get all of the redness, and as one practitioner calls it, turns your face into hamburger, which is pretty graphic.
Yeah.
But we think that means then that both the patient population and the treating physicians will accept and rapidly adopt the new treatment that we are offering. And the quicker you can conquer that curve, the better, from a revenue standpoint, valuation standpoint, and so forth.
I love that because it reminds us that the reason why you should invest in NextGen isn't just to make money, even though that's what we're all here for. Ultimately, we hope to make quite a bit of money here. However, you're also talking about investing in something that changes lives. And that, I don't know that you can put a price on that. I mean, to have somebody who's currently dealing with those really unacceptable treatments for that skin condition, to be able to have a treatment that changes their experience so dramatically, I mean, that has to feel incredibly gratifying to you and your team.
It's I we usually say it like this: it is not difficult to get up in the morning and come to work.
Yeah.
This is something that means a lot to all of us, and we've put our own money into it. We've put our heart and soul into it, some blood and some sweat and tears as well. I don't mind saying, I'm not ashamed to say it, but it is very, very gratifying, indeed.
Yeah, congratulations to both you and your team for that. I love the work that you're doing. Let's go back a little bit on financial terms. What happens if you don't raise the full 10 million? Now, we talked about, you're planning on doing this 10 million Reg D followed by a 75 million Reg A. What if you don't raise the full 10 million in the D?
I think we shift to the Regulation A fundraising, and we just tighten our belts a little bit. We have these things that we have aspirations to do from an R&D standpoint. Then we just have to make some decisions and make some cuts, to various different plans that we have. Nothing we haven't done before, and certainly nothing we can't do again. But from a speed to market standpoint, my hope is that we raise the money, get all of the work done that we have in mind, and get it done quickly. Um, and I want to kind of drive into that a little bit, or if I can kind of derivate just for a moment.
Sure.
Why is it good to do it quickly? I mean, everybody wants to move fast. The lifespan of the patents is really the big key from a valuation perspective. So the quicker we can get to some developmental milestones and monetize some of these molecules, then the company that then comes in and buys those molecules from us has a longer runway. And so everybody talks about the patent cliff and the significant decrease in valuations that companies see because of a drug that's going off patent and so forth. I think the average, if I recall correctly, was 7 years of useful life for a patent once, let's say, a Merck or a Pfizer were to buy it. They're accustomed to seeing about a 7 year lifespan.
Wow.
In our case, our IP is actually solid out to 2038. So we're giving them a quicker, or excuse me, a longer runway by virtue of developing it more quickly.
So now we've gotten into some of those specifics. We've talked about what exits could potentially mean for each of these products. But I think the exit strategy is really multi-pronged, isn't it? Because there's a lot of things that could happen here. And let's talk about those exit options, let's call
Mhm.
that, as we kind
Mhm.
of move through timelines.
Yeah, it's I think there's a handful, I guess I would say. One obviously is that we call it big pharma. Big pharma comes and says, we really like that molecule. We'd like to buy that one from you, and that happens all the time. Um, the other possibility is that they come and say, you know what, we like your molecules, but we also like a lot of the pipeline compounds that you've been developing, which we haven't really talked about yet. And I do want to maybe mention that a little bit in a
Sure.
bit. And so they may say, hey, we'd love to buy the entire business from you as well. That again happens as well. So those two in particular, I think there's another possibility that instead of saying we want to buy the molecule from you, that they ask for a license. And so that's an interesting possibility from my vantage point. I think that if they were to license the molecule from us, it could, in theory, be licensed for a specific cancer indication. So we might be able to license the topical for, let's say, actinic keratosis. But there's also other uses for that topical drug that we still have the ability then to go and develop and license to others. And so you now have an opportunity for multiple revenue streams coming off of a single molecule. And then probably a final option would just be go public and IPO, rig up and hire a sales force and start doing this, ourselves.
Or they buy the entire company or parts of it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So talk about, you had said you wanted to get back into the pipeline. Let's talk about
Mhm.
what do we have in that pipeline? This is, something that could become interesting.
So, our focus is cancer, 100%. But we also know that a lot of our compounds, and through some of our early testing, showed efficacy and promise in other applications. And so some of that would be in the antibiotic space, some of it in diabetes. And so those are areas of interest that are potential value drivers that we can see. And so we don't put a ton of effort and time into it because we want to make sure we continue focusing our the vast majority of our energies on the cancer and oncology and dermatology space. But when you build your pipeline, you're essentially building for the future, if you will. And so we could see an exit and an opportunity, and we want to make sure that we've developed those pipeline compounds as far as we can, without really spending a ton of time and effort and money on them, so that we can really hit the gas when we have an exit with the 6.02 compound or the 21T compound.
So I think we're done with questions for today. I think we've gotten quite a bit out for the investors to kind of take a look at and digest. Just kind of recap, we've got a $3.3 trillion overall market that potentially can be satisfied with the suite of companies that is invested in from an investment in NextGen Scientific. Um, not only are there monetary rewards here, but you're talking about products that can change people's lives. That makes it a very compelling and impactful investment. Um, what are the next steps for interested investors now? Um, is there a place that they can download the PPM, Jason?
Yep. And just while we were talking, I neglected to do this earlier, so I better make sure and get this slide up there in front of people. The website they can go to is investinnextgen.com. It's got a lot of information on it there. The PPM is there. And then obviously we want people to make as an informed decision as they possibly can. So um, I'm happy to talk to people. I know you're available to talk to people. Um, want people to ask as many questions as possible and as they have, so that they can feel confident in what they're looking at here. It's a complicated industry, but at the end of the day, the goal is simple. Let's create a cancer drug that people can actually use and really improve cancer outcomes. And then at the same time, let's make some nutraceuticals that answer a lot of health and wellness needs that people have all the time in
Absolutely.
prevention.
So investors can go to investinnextgen.com. They
Mhm.
can see all information about this raise. They can download the PPM. They can read through the PPM, all of the risks that have been delineated in that PPM. And if they want to invest, can they do that right there on that site?
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct. Yeah,
so
you can.
on investinnextgen.com, you can click on Invest Now and invest in NextGen Scientifics, be a part of this impactful investment that has a lot of financial possibilities down the road. Um, Contact information for today. If you're interested in contacting investor relations at Genzada, you can do that in investor.relations@genzada.com. Their phone number is 620-204-7150. You can also contact me. As I said, I work for Texture Capital. We are the broker dealer of record for this particular offering, and we're also doing investor outreach for them. So you can schedule an appointment with me where we can go over all of the details of this. You can ask kind of pointy questions, and we can get those questions answered for you prior to going and investing in the product. And you can either reach me at DiScipio. That's DISCIPIO. If you could move your head slightly, I could
Oh,
see that. Yeah, there you go. DiScipio at texture.capital. So that's DiScipio at texture.capital. If you want to learn more about Texture, you can go to texture.capital. Notice that that's not .com, that's .capital. So texture.capital. You can learn more about Texture. You can also reach me by phone at 617-798-1650. And we're pleased that you all took the time to spend with us today as we discuss this with you. We hope that this is just the beginning of a journey where you will learn more and more about NextGen Scientific and the companies that are involved in it and the stellar team that kind of runs it. We'll be doing these webinars on a monthly basis, and we hope to see some of you at future ones. I appreciate your time today, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
thanks, everyone.